Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and we're here with our weekly interview show, Better, which is sponsored by Newsweek. And our guest this week is named Minda Harts. Minda is the author of numerous books, including The Memo. And we're going to be talking about what women of color need to know at work. Minda, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Dorie. Honored to be in conversation.
Thank you. All right. Well, first question, your book, also your organization that you have started, The Memo, the title is inspired by a Drake song, which I loved. Can you give us a little context? Like what is the lyric and why did that resonate for you?
Okay, Dorie, your audience may be judging me already. Maybe not. I don't know. but I was actually in my previous life working my 9 to 5, and I was on a business trip from DC to New York City on the Amtrak, and I was thinking about just the experiences of women of color, Black and Brown women, anyone who see themselves on the margins. And as I was thinking about those things, Drake's song "Trophies" comes through my earbuds, and it said, "Did you boys not get the memo?" And I thought to myself, the boys didn't get the memo. Women of color do deserve a seat at the table, and it just kind of took a life of its own. So I don't know if Drake knows that. He probably doesn't, but I hope that he knows that he's inspiring people around the world.
That's right, Drake. If you're watching, here we go. That's so cool. I love that. And in reading your book, one of the things you talk about is kind of a starting point is you're reading Lean In, and of course, 10 years ago now, it's hard to believe it was that long ago. But Lean In was such a media sensation. So you're reading it, you are eagerly anticipating it, and you discover in reading it that it just really does not speak to you in the way that you might have imagined. Can you take us back to that moment? What was it that you were looking for that wasn't there? And as a result, what have you tried to put back into the conversation?
Yeah, I'm thankful for Lean In, and like you said, this year is 10 years, and it's crazy to think that all that time has passed. But um, my office that I was working in at the time, they bought all the women books, Lean In books, and we were reading it together and all the things. And I'm a big career business book junkie, and every time I've read a lot of the books, I kept feeling like I was an asterisk, or my experience wasn't reflected in the pages, and I was kind of tired of just not reading myself and our experiences being a woman of color, because two things can be true at the same time. We can all maybe identify as women and work at the same place, but experience that workplace very differently. So when everyone was, very rah rah about Lean In, I thought, okay, this book has got to include some of the things that I haven't read in the others, because so many women are identifying with it. And so as I read it, I just felt like, man, here's another missed opportunity to not include, all women in the career narrative. And so for me, it actually inspired me to write my book, The Memo, because I wanted to talk about what it's like when women of color try to lean in. What does it look like when we want to lean in? So I wanted to expand the narrative to what women are we talking about, right, when we say women. And so I wanted to have a career book that talked about our experiences too.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously you've written an entire book about it, so there's plenty to be said. But broadly speaking, what does happen when women of color try to lean in? Obviously, it's a different response and a different reaction. But in general, what was it that you or colleagues of yours experienced that was so different than the reality that Sheryl Sandberg had been describing in her book?
Right. So, some of it is the network. Not to say that many women of color don't have Ivy League networks, but it's hard to lean in when you're not even in the room. And at the time, there were no, it was less than 3% of women of color, even in executive roles, right? So it's hard to have a conversation when you're not even thought of as the obvious winner. It's hard to excel in your career when your manager's not invested in you, right? And so, Ms. Sandberg, I'm thankful that she wrote Lean In, because I never would have written the memo, but it's easier to speak up for yourself when you're in the room, right? And I think that we miss some of that. And women of color in particular, we have a lot of biases in terms of, you could be deemed as aggressive or hard to you work with, all these different things that not that other women don't experience, but I think we have to tippy toe around the workplace a lot harder than other women. And the last thing I'll say is I used to have a manager, Dorie, and he would always say to people on our team, "Man, you remind me of my younger self." And he never said that to me, because I didn't remind him of his younger self. And I think representation matters, whether we're writing in a book, we're in the office. And as I said before, two things can be true at the same time. We can be women in the workplace, but we can't forget that every woman's experience is not the same.
Yeah, that's a great point, Minda. Thank you. Now, in your book, you tell a story about something that happened to you early in your career. You were, out at a meeting or something like that with your manager. I don't know if it was the same one or a different one, and he got inspired, if that's the word, by your burnt orange color that you were wearing on your nails, your nail polish, and it led you down the path to a new understanding. Can you talk a little bit about that incident and what you gleaned from it?
Yeah, it's funny when things happen in the workplace, I don't think we realize how a lot of those things we carry that baggage or, bias with us from job to job. And that was my first corporate job. That was my first manager. He happened to be a white male and he saw that I had on burnt orange fingernail polish and he said, "You people really love your bright colors." And he joked around for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. And it was in that moment that I realized, oh, he sees me as different than him. And he was making jokes. And at the time I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could say anything because there's this stereotype in the workplace: don't be an angry Black woman, right? So I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he said this. It's in the 2000s. That this isn't funny. But being the only, I had to laugh it off and keep moving with the rest of my day. Even though he might have moved on, I still thought about that comment each and every day. And from that moment forward, I never wore bright colors in the workplace again because it signaled to me that, oh, this isn't natural, right? This isn't normal. And so I wanted to belong. I think all of us want that feeling in the workplace. And it just really made me second guess myself, at every turn.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a really important point about, what many people would term microaggressions and when to speak up and when not to speak up. And I'm curious, how do you think about this? Because obviously there are some instances where someone is saying something and they might be trying to make a dig. Other times the intent is either neutral, oh, let's just make conversation, or it might even be a positive intent about, hey, let's bond, let's connect somehow, but it's just really not landing the right way. How do you think through, if you're on the receiving end of a statement like that, what's the thought process in your mind about how to handle it based on kind of where the people are coming from, or is there a sort of algorithm that you follow?
At the time when I was, early 20s, the algorithm was, oh, okay, I guess can't say anything and I just suffer in silence, right? And I realized suffering in silence doesn't help them and it doesn't help me, right? And so if you are experiencing microaggressions, you do have choices. And I think sometimes, especially as women of color, we think we have no choice. And what I realized was when I used to think I didn't have a voice, Dorie, I had to shift the narrative and say, I do have a voice. I just have to decide how I want to use it. Now, is this a situation where I can give someone grace? Now, my manager, he would go on to say things like that each and every day. So you could say I didn't, that wasn't my intention, but we also have to look at the impact, right? So yes, I don't think people show up to the workplace and say, who can I oppress today, right? Is it going to be Minda? Is it going to be someone on the? I don't think people show up that way, but sometimes things land differently. And so for me, I say, okay, what how can I get through my day the best way possible, right? Is this something, we'll call him Chad for today, is this something that he's doing all the time? Was it a one-time occurrence? Do I see a pattern here, right? So if I see a pattern of toxic behavior, then I give myself permission to have a conversation, but I don't root the conversation in, I feel like you're being sexist, I feel like you're being racist, I feel like you insert ageist. I say, Remember, Chad, when you made the comment yesterday, I rooted in fact, right? And I wanted to tell you this because I know that probably wasn't your intention. And I know you don't want to say anything like that again or to someone else. So I just wanted to make you aware of it. And so I have the courage to step up to the plate. And if you are on the other end, you've said the thing that you wish you could reel back in, accept ownership of that, apologize, and be grateful that someone had enough strength to tell you that this was an issue so that you can remove the barrier. And when I think about microaggressions or macroaggressions, we should be having these courageous conversations so we can remove barriers for people instead of creating more. Like the show is called Better. Let's not go back to normal. Let's get to better, right? So going back to normal might be sweeping it under the rug, but to get to better, we have to have these conversations so that we know, and no one's going to know how you're feeling about something if you never say it, right? And so for me, we have a lot of power in our voice, and a lot of my books center around your voice and realizing that you can't control how someone responds, but you can control how you advocate for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Minda. That's great. This is Dorie Clark. We're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better, and we're here with Minda Harts. You can learn more about her work at mindaharts.com. Her book, among many, but one of her books is The Memo, and we're going to be talking soon about some of the other work that she's done as well. But Minda, a question that I have for you, one of the features that we have in Better is we have the Better Leader of the Week. And the way this works is that our interview guest for the week nominates someone that they believe has done exemplary work in terms of raising up diversity issues in positive ways. And so your nominee for the Better Leader of the Week this week is Tara J. Frank. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about her and why you decided to pick her.
Yes, thank you so much. I believe that success is not a solo sport, and we should speak other people's names in the room. So I love that this is a segment on the show. I nominated Tara because she is a leader in every sense of the word. She has a book called Waymakers, and part of that is inspiring other leaders to be able to make a better way for the future generations and current in the workplace. And so I just love that Tara walks the walk and talks the talk, and she gives people the tools that maybe many of us don't have in our toolkit to be better, right? To be a sponsor, to be an ally, just to be a better human in the workplace. And so sometimes, in all times, we need role models to do that. And I always look to Tara to see, how she's role modeling being a better leader. And so I'm a better leader because of the work that she puts out into the world.
That's terrific. Thank you. It's a great endorsement. Tara, congratulations on being the Newsweek Better Leader of the Week. And Minda, just returning to the point that you were making earlier about the interactions you had early in your career with Chad, the manager who made some off the cuff comments that were not terribly helpful. What if somebody's on the opposite end of the spectrum? Let's say they really want to be an ally to the women of color at work that are their colleagues, that are their employees. What are some of your top recommendations for someone who actually really wants to try to do a good job?
Yeah, I love this so much. I think when we talk about being an ally, but in my books, I call them success partners. How can you partner with someone in the workplace for success, right? So if you aren't sure what to do, but you're well intentioned, you have to read books like The Memo and Right Within and other books like I or other people have put out so that you can understand what it's like for someone to show up. It's really hard to be a good ally if you don't understand what it is like to be me, right? You're never going to be someone who doesn't identify maybe the same as you, but think about it through a lens of humanity, dignity, equity, and respect. That's something that we all want at work. So if you see somebody's dignity being stripped away, you see somebody's going through it, you know that they're the only one. How can you show up and remove barriers for them? And I think sometimes we get so fearful because we don't want to create a problem, Dorie, right? We don't want to step on any toes, but listen, the problem has already began. How can you diffuse it, right? And there's a lot of different spectrums. You don't have to scream across on the Zoom screen to chat and say, hey, don't ever say that to Minda again. There are various ways to be able to do that. You might have a side conversation with someone. You might direct message someone. I often think about that moment when I was younger and the orange nail polish. There was a colleague that was there when that was said, and they just kind of like cringed and snickered, but they never did anything. And I often think if I could get back in my DeLorean and go back to the future, what I would have told that person to be able to do. And they had a couple different options. They could have said, hey, Chad, we don't joke around like that in the workplace. That's one option. They could have come to me after the fact and said, Minda, I want to apologize for not showing up for you in that moment. I was just as shocked when he said it out of his mouth, but I wanted to check in with you and know that once it happens again, if it happens again, I will show up better. Right. So there's different ways. Or they could have had a conversation with Chad. Hey, Chad, I know what you meant might have just been joking, but think about how that landed on Minda. So when you think about it, there's always an option.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I love that. Thank you. And Minda, I obviously when you are the only one or one of very few of whatever someone is at work, whether it is a woman of color, whether it is an older person or a young person or LGBT, etc., it can feel a little uncomfortable at times looking around, and that is often one of the things that sometimes leads to imposter syndrome. And so I'm curious if you're, speaking to women of color in the workplace who, are out there, they're working hard and they're doing a great job, and they may be extremely well qualified for where they are, but they perhaps, like many folks, have a kind of nagging voice in their head about, oh, do I really belong here? What do you say to them, or what is your advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, I think number one is a mindset shift, right? I think when we are, one of few or the only, you start to believe some of the other narratives that have been created that you didn't co-sign on, right? So instead of having an enemy state of mind, why don't they choose me? Why isn't this happening? Why did they choose me? Questioning yourself when they hired you for a reason. Shift to an empire state of mind. No longer having enemy, being oppressive to ourselves and our mindset, but having that empire. I can make it anywhere. And the thing that I always tell myself, even when I enter a room as the only, whatever at whatever intersection I'm entering as, I belong in every room that I enter, but not every room deserves to have me. Right. And I think we have to harness that power for ourselves instead of giving that away, knowing that my skills, my expertise, regardless if anybody else sees it or acknowledges it, those are still mine. Right. So let's value ourselves, put some respect on our own name. And the more we feed ourselves that positive talk, I know it might sound cliche, but self talk and is really affirmative when you don't have other people affirming you in a workplace like that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. Now, I know obviously diversity issues have taken center stage in a really big way over the past few years, especially since George Floyd. I have started to hear personally lately from some of my colleagues who are diversity speakers and things like that, that they feel like maybe, now that the heat is off a little bit, that things are beginning to kind of revert to traditional means, and that maybe companies are a little less interested or a little less aggressive about that. I'm curious at sort of a macro level, what are you seeing? Do you feel like the changes that companies put in place, or the level of focus on DEI that was put forward in the last few years, is something that is sustainable or is going to be sustained, or do you feel like you're seeing slippage?
I'm seeing slippage, Dory, and I hate to acknowledge that because there was a lot of great talk, and now there's a lot of mistrust, right? Because a lot of the layoffs that are taking place across various industries, some of the first departments that were cut were diversity. Were the DEI departments, DEI leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And so even I look at it from my personal work, has declined in terms of just the priority. And you still have um, diversity issues at these companies, but and if they don't prioritize it, they're just going to continue to get bigger, and then that leads to situations that you don't want to deal with later down the line. You want to be on the right side of the hashtag instead of the wrong side of the hashtag. And so I hope that leaders will get back to, I hate to have to say it again, but get to better, right? Because we cannot prioritize trust. We cannot, I'm sorry, not prioritize trust. We cannot deprioritize trust. We have to make it important for everybody. We can't say that diversity is important and then in the next breath we slash resources, right? Because again, if we want people to do their best work, then we have to provide an environment that's psychologically safe. And it's not safe if people no longer have employee resource groups to go to. They no longer have, get to read books like the memo or others, or have speakers like either one of us, attend. And so I am concerned, but I do think that we will get back to it, because you can't, when dignity, humanity, and respect are on the line, no workplace can be sustainable without those things.
Yeah, thank you, Minda. So I wanted to take a moment also to ask you about what I believe, if I'm correct about this, is your newest book, It's, to a different audience. It is "You Are More Than Magic: The Black and Brown Girl's Guide to Finding Your Voice." Talk to me a little bit about this project. Why did you decide to do that, and how do you see it, sort of fitting in with the arc of your oeuvre?
Well, thank you for that. You Were More Than Magic was important to me because I realized I wrote two books, The Memo and Right Within, for, adult women, I guess you could say, of women of color in the workplace and our managers and leaders and those who want to be better allies. But I realized that things like self advocacy, um, a positive mindset, how to negotiate your salary, those aren't things that we should wait to get tools um, to work on when we it get into the workplace. I wanted to be able to provide those tools to young adults before they even get to be our ages, right? Being able to remind them that they already have a voice right where they are, whether they're negotiating with a grade or they're negotiating their first summer job. I wanted them to be able to have that. And also with tough conversations, many of us don't have the tough conversations in the workplace because we were never taught how to have them as teenagers, right? And so I wanted to be able to provide a roadmap, some skills, so that our next generation is fully prepared to be their best selves when they get into a workplace or they start their first day of college and they just have the resources. So, oftentimes people have probably heard, oh, Black girl magic, but there's nothing magical about being a woman of color in the workplace or walking through your life in that way. Everything we've gotten is through hard work and dedication. And so I wanted to humanize the experiences of young girls as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to end with one more question, but I will just mention this is Dorie Clark with Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better. And you can learn more about the show, subscribe to newsletter updates at dorieclark.com. And you can learn more about our guest this week at mindaharts.com. She is the author of numerous books, including The Memo. And Minda, the final question that I have for you is, just what is inspiring you lately? I mean, obviously, when we look at a topic like improving conditions around racial justice in the workplace, there's lots of things that still remain to be done. But it's also important to celebrate successes, and whether that is a particular company or a project or initiative, what is it that you are looking out on recently that you see that you find hopeful or inspiring?
Yeah, I'm an optimist, Dory. And so even though there's some slippage and some different things, nothing is perfect. But if each of us does our part, and I'm seeing that, I think that we're all asking ourselves better questions. Companies, there are still companies who are committed to DEI, and when we can have conversations like this on a platform like Newsweek, I mean that speaks volumes. And so let's just continue to have these conversations and implement. And I think education is important for each and every one of us. And so I'm optimistic that people still care about humanity. And that's what all of this really boils down to. We could be talking about race, gender, or identity, but at the core of it, it's humanity. And I do believe people still want that in every part of our life.
That's great. Thank you so much, Minda Harts. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.